Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Jeff, and you're listening to episode 20 of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Comic Book of the Day podcast. My name is Jeff, and today's comic is awesome. I love this story. I love the collection of stories that this is based on. Today's comic is The Saga of Ghul. Okay, this was published in January of 1988 by DC Comics. It is a reprint, though, so let's be clear, this is not an original book, but it doesn't, I couldn't resist getting this set because I love this story so much, and it probably has, I don't know, it probably is one of my top 5 or so comic stories of all time. I mean, I guess this would be superhero stories, right? If you've got For the Man Who Has Everything, you've got Demon in a Bottle, the Iron Man story, you've got the Kree Skrull War, you've got the Saga of Ghul, you've got the Death of Superman. You've got all kinds of great storylines in the past, but this is definitely one of those that ranks way up high there on my personal list. This is a reprinting. It is a 4-issue. Like I said, it's a 4-issue mini-series published in 1988, and it reprints some of the classic Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams stories. First and foremost is the first appearance of Talia, right? So this is Into the Den of the Death Dealers. This reprints a Detective Comics number 411, right? 411 is the first appearance of Talia. Ooh, that's a good key book for you to get if you can find it. It's probably relatively affordable, I think. If you were looking for meaningful key issues, you could probably find this relatively inexpensively. I won't say cheap, but I'll say inexpensively. And it's a good key to have, right? And then that was published in 1971, right? So this is 1988 reprinting a 1971 story. And then this also reprints the famous Daughter of the Demon story from Batman 232. Now, that book, man, let me tell you something. That book had quite an impact on me when I was a kid. That is actually, I think this is probably the second or third time that these stories have been reprinted. And there have been a couple of different ways and collections that these stories have been reprinted in, but one of them that springs to mind is a Treasury Edition book. Now, I actually have a signed copy of the Treasury Edition by Neal Adams, and I got it signed by Mr. Adams because, if I had to pick books that had sentimental value. I've met Neal a few times at a few different comic book conventions, but this was the very first time that I had an opportunity to meet him years and years and years ago. And when I realized that I was going to have an opportunity to meet Neal Adams, who had such a huge impact on me as a younger kid reading comic books, I realized that there was a very short list of books that I wanted to get Mr. Adams to sign, and one of them was the DC Treasury Edition of Batman, with that reprints a lot of the story of the demon, or probably it might be best described as kind of like an abridged collection of the story of the demon stuff that Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams worked on in the 70s. And I would say that Treasury Edition maybe was reprinted around 76, 77, 78, somewhere around there. But it was only a handful of years after it originally appeared in the comic books. So that's one large format that this was reprinted in, and I loved that book. And I can definitely remember owning the Treasury Edition as a kid. I didn't own the original Detective 411, Batman 232, Batman 234, Batman 237. Somewhere around those. I didn't own those books originally as a kid. Of course, I own them now. I have a relatively compact run of Batman comic books. It's, my run of Batman comic books starts at around 180, which is the first appearance of Poison Ivy. I've got a smattering of books prior to 180. But I start at around the 180s or so. 180, I've got that, and then I start around there, pre-200s. Then I've got from 200 until probably around 260 or so. So I probably have got about 5 or 6 years there, starting at around, like I said, around 180, but definitely complete from 200 to about 260, maybe 264, because I think... from 258, I think there's about 6 issues there that are 100-page super spectaculars, and of course I own those. But the Batman run, I think, which hands down, I think clearly the best Batman of all Batman runs is, in my opinion anyway, is that run from around 200. Maybe around 219, 215, somewhere around there, until about maybe 251, which is that wonderful Joker cover by Neal Adams with Batman on the cover of the card or whatever. But those stories, to me, I think are probably the most historically significant Batman stories. And then I think after that, probably I think it's 404 through 408, which is year one by Frank Miller and Mazzucchelli. But this series, this book that's today's comic book of the day, is a reprinting of those early 70s stories with Denny and Neal. And I just love. I mean, I remember this is one of the first appearances, I think of Matches Malone, right? Which I thought was really interesting, that Batman, who is Bruce Wayne's alter ego, also has another alter ego of a criminal. And you get a little bit of the Matches Malone backstory spread throughout some of the previous books, but then Matches Malone is used as Batman's alter ego, his criminal criminal alter ego. So whenever he goes undercover, Batman into into the criminal element, as it were, he would disguise himself as Matches Malone, and I remember being completely smitten with that idea. I thought that idea was wonderful, that Batman would put on a disguise. He wouldn't wear his cape or his cowl or any of that stuff, and he would be essentially wide open, dressed as Matches Malone, sort of in a way to sort of be undercover within the criminal element, or underground bars and the crime scene of the seedy underbelly of Gotham City. If Batman had to go undercover to get information, and this also represents the departure of Batman from the campy Batman, right? So this is the Dark Knight detective. This is a young Denny O'Neil and a young Neal Adams, really referring, sort of reacting to the camp of the 60s Batman TV show, right? So this is Denny and Neal. And these guys, you got to remember, these cats are young, and I believe around this time they might be in their late 20s. So, they're rambunctious. They're it's the late 60s, early 70s. These cats are pretty young. They're pretty rebellious, right? They don't want these comics to be your dad's comics. They want to make their mark and stake their claim and put their name out there, and they really want to reimagine how these characters behave and are written and are seen. And this was Denny and Neal's opportunity to take what at the time was sort of an overly campy, funny, comedic Batman character and take him back to his dark roots, a la Detective 27, 28, 29, 30, those early golden age stories where Batman was very much a creature of the night. But this is really, really cool. If you go over to the Facebook page today, I posted a YouTube video that I thought was pretty funny, and it was Batman Beyond, where Talia guest starred, and she was there's a confrontation between Terry McGinnis and Talia, where Terry is sort of talking to Talia about who Ra's al Ghul is, and he sort of goes on a litany of, he rolls down on a little list of things that Ra's al Ghul has done, and how Talia is using her wealth and everything to sort of undo all of the damage that Ra's al Ghul did. And Talia very stoically kind of stands there and listens to it all, and then sort of at the very end of it corrects him and says that his name was, that's very good, but his pronunciation is, the name is pronounced Ra's al Ghul. So I never, when it's RA''S and, I'm a young kid, I always saw his name as Ra's al Ghul, right? I always saw it as RA''S, Ra's al Ghul. And I don't know why. It could have been Ra, like the sun god, but Ra's al Ghul. And I heard a lot of people pronounce it that way, but for some reason, it may have just been the fact that I was just a kid or whatever it may be, but I always pronounced his name as Ra's al Ghul. And I think even to this day, it's kind of difficult for me to pronounce it as, Raish. And I don't recall in the early Batman movie if that's exactly how he pronounced his name, but I always thought it was, I always pronounced it as Ra's al Ghul. And I think probably to this day, when I see the name in print, in the title of the book, for instance, I always think of it as Ra's al Ghul. And I've always find it funny that there's, probably a bunch of different ways to pronounce it. But all of that was prior to cartoons and animation and movies and feature films, and the idea that mass media had picked up on this character. So when your only frame of reference is the comic book itself, and there's no internet, and you have really no way to sort of sit around with a large group of people and discuss how his name is pronounced. It for years and years, and maybe for decades, I probably just sort of pronounced it as Ra's al Ghul and went sort of blissfully unaware that there were different ways to pronounce it, and that even such a controversy existed. So, for what it's worth, Ra's al Ghul, right? So this is the saga of Ra's al Ghul. But anyway, the cover of this is beautiful. This is a really, really terrific cover. It's a 4-issue miniseries. It's on fairly, it's a nice format Baxter paper. This is, of course, 1988, around that time when DC was publishing, just about everything on Baxter paper. So this is a really, really terrific sort of presentation of those stories. So if you have an opportunity to find these issues, you can get them, on eBay or however you can find them, then I would, definitely suggest getting them, because the covers are beautiful. The retelling is beautiful, and they're just really, really gorgeous books. So if you see them or run across them at a comic book show, or you're so inclined to go run over to eBay and check them out, then I would definitely recommend picking them up. These are all-time classic Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams stories, and you really owe it to yourself, if you're a Batman fan, to sort of have your hands on these. And if you can't afford, Detective 411, and you can't afford a decent copy of Batman 232, then this just might be a really good alternative for you, as a good way to have them and to hold onto them and read them. And I think these books I think the 4 books go for somewhere around, $30 or so. So I don't think that they're terribly expensive. So I would definitely get them, take the opportunity and see if you can lay your hands on them. And if so, enjoy them and sort of devour them in much the same way that I did when I was a kid. So if you'd like to check the cover out, again, you can run over to comicbookoftheday.com. That is our sort of central hub where we're publishing, a different comic every day, and we'll continue to podcast every day here about them. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and Google Play, and we would love it if you did that. I think we always enjoy having subscribers who get to have this sort of automatically downloaded every day, and spend 10 or 15 minutes a day listening to us, or listening to me ramble on and wax philosophically about a different comic book every day. So once again, we are the Comic Book of the Day. I appreciate you joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.